wonderful trilogy that, of course, couldn't encapsulate the entirety of this series. There was just too much information. But with 3 films, they did a monstrously powerful, exceptional job at capturing not only the spirit of the work, but then just what people often don't really put together is you're like, the world building. Just look at the beauty of this image and this, and look at how dark and evil these one areas were, and that creature and those things, and the mighty shot of Gandalf appearing on the horizon with the sun rising, and him, Ian McKellen's beautiful and competent wizard-like voice. You shall not pass! All that kind of dramatic stuff that you can't get when you're reading a book.
Melting Pot, a global podcast series hosted by Payal, connects guests who have inspiring stories and reaches out to a multicultural audience over 52 countries. Guests are diverse, such as celebrities, entrepreneurs, travelers, and many more who've had a turning point in their lives and moved over to a holistic lifestyle. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, social media. Hi everyone. Today on this episode, we're joined by a true Renaissance man whose talents span the realms of acting, writing, singing, and voiceover. He's got 30 years of experience as an actor, director, and a stage combat artist. And he's got 15 years of experience as a licensed fencing instructor. My guest today is Matthew Carauddo. Matthew is a creator in every sense because he's also the visionary behind Diamond Dragons, where he serves as not just the creator, the author, the designer, but also the main illustrator and the primary voiceover artist. Wow. Thank you for joining me today, Matthew.
Thanks, Pyle. It's a pleasure to be here. And that was a very luxurious opening, and I appreciate it. And I just hope it doesn't sound too much for the audiences, but you pretty much got it right that I have had to accomplish most everything with my series. And then also in the past, the kind of work that I've done is, I wouldn't say it's common for most authors. Like it's rare to find someone who is doing a fantasy type of series such as this one, and then also has had this background in theater and performance and film and acting, and then also saber fencing and this kind of thing. It's just not, it's not common, and it is what it is.
Yes, it clearly is not common, which is why you are definitely a very interesting guest. So I just want to start off with asking you to share a little bit of your journey that actually led you to becoming a licensed fencing instructor.
That's a great question. So to roll back the clock here with fencing, I will try to keep it as short as possible, but rolling back all the way to somewhere around the 90s, we'll say the late 90s, I had already had some level of experience, very basic, however, in staged combat from my theatrical experience when I was a young man. I'd already choreographed scenes from Cyrano de Bergerac, which some of your listeners and or viewers will be familiar with it, or they may not, which is an Edmund Rostand book and play and whatnot. People can look that up if they want. They might be most familiar with the 1950s version of Cyrano, which starred Jose Ferrer. Some people may be familiar with Miguel Ferrer, who unfortunately passed away recently, and that was his son. But it was, anyway, Jose Ferrer and Mala Powers, a wonderful actress of that time in the 1950s. And I would call it arguably the definitive version of Cyrano. But anyway, I choreographed some scenes from that. And then also one of my hugest projects that I did in, of all places, high school, was my senior project, was choreographing the fight scene from The Princess Bride, but I didn't just do the sword fight. I did pretty much the 3 major scenes with it. It's a long story how that all came to fruition, but that was a lot of fun, but it was a ton of work. Most of my instructors almost immediately told me, absolutely not, you are not doing any of this. I'm like, you just wait, let me explain the project. You don't have to say no immediately, but once I pitch it to you and explain to you and show you all of the the background and the work that's going into it, maybe you will either change your mind or you can either say no. Anyway, long story short, that was that. Then on to college and other things. I'm fast forwarding. After college, and I had done just minor projects. I wasn't trying to get crazy and try to be like, oh, I am an expert and look at me and so on. I was just like, now that I'm out of college and I've taken some basic fencing classes and all these kinds of things, I'm like, I want to find an academy of fencing where I can perhaps get into it more just as the sport and not solely focused on staged combat. And there is, to let your listeners and viewers know, there's a huge distinction between staged combat and
Yeah.
sport fencing.
I was going to ask you, what are the similarities and the differences between the two? So you've preempted my question, so go
Oh, good.
ahead.
Well, that's helpful. That's helpful. I am reading minds now. It's another skill in my book. But so I often think of it like when we think of those old math fun things where two circles would pop up and they intersect and they call it the union, is most certainly when you think of things like Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee of yesteryear or whatnot. I'm trying to think of other Jet Li martial arts, this kind of thing, whatever, or sword work from like days of Errol Flynn and the characters of Zorro.
Yeah.
There are certainly places where if the directors, the actors, the choreographers, and all the people involved in the production are being brought aboard with real experience from things like the traditional duel and what was also often called way back in the day called the affair of honor, right? When you would challenge someone, it would be an honorable thing. You would say, you, sir, have failed to do X, Y, and Z. You have dishonored A, B, or C, and so on and so forth. I challenge you to a duel. You will be there on this day and this thing, and I therefore this and that and the other. And most of the time you'd accept it. Otherwise, you would live with the shame of essentially being caught in your lies or whatever it was. So going back to the olden times of that stuff, the duel was quite a thing. And the skills necessary to comprehend sword work of that time were legendarily difficult. And additionally, it's a thing that we can't comprehend today because often those duels were to the death. Also, fast forwarding into the future, then it became to a term called first blood. A lot of people have heard that term, maybe even from the first Rambo movie, First Blood. But that term actually originated from, of all places, the duel. And that is the history of why they would wear the white jackets. Because some people think, why the hell is everybody in all these? I don't get it. It's nice and all, and you guys look cute and everything, but what's with all the white? How come this and how come that? I'm like, it's part of tradition. Because the blood would show up clear as day. And then the referees would stop the match, declare that, yes, this person bled first, therefore you lose and you whatever. Okay, so I'm encapsulating the duel and fencing and all this kind of stuff all here in, I don't know, 30 to 60 seconds, whatever. But yeah, Pyle, there's quite a sort of history to all these things. Now, we'll go on to one other thing to help solidify the answer to your question. Bob Anderson, also known as Darth Vader of all people. And I don't mean the voice of Darth Vader, nor do the walking around burly body of Darth Vader, because that was David Prowse. But Bob Anderson was the fighting Vader. And he often shared the role with another known choreographer at the time named Peter Diamond. Really cool name, of course, Peter Diamond. But anyhow, people can look those names up if they want. But Bob Anderson would also be well known because he was an Olympic level champion fencer and a competent choreographer, professional choreographer of, I want to say, the 50s to the 80s in this sort of area and whatnot. And he went on to do more work with Lord of the Rings and whatnot before he died. But either way, the point being is that Bob Anderson is a competent choreographer. And now, to bridge that gap, what made Bob Anderson different? Why was it that he was a champion fencer, but then, of course, then there's fight choreography for film? And Pyle, to sum it all up, fight work in film and books, if it's being described with words or whatever, is about storytelling, right? It's not about, did they do this cool move? Although you can show that in films, that's great. You can show that an expert action was performed. Maybe someone's doing a backflip and Jackie Chan is showing off his amazing martial skills and flipping while and he's moving around like a lightning bolt, and it's amazing to the audience. But Jackie Chan, along with Bob Anderson and other wonderful choreographers, knew that the most important part of fight work is still storytelling. You're serving the characters, you're serving the dramatic structure, and you're serving the kind of moments like, what does this lead on to? Why are they fighting? We're not just having a fight to be cool and look at how hard I can punch. Look at how cool I can look when I pose and I kill you now. It's not interesting. It's not interesting to see two dudes fighting or two girls fighting or whatever. It is, however, when you have something set up where the drama shows a big evil master and then this young good guy who won't let anything get in the way of him and the things that he wants to serve, like the hope and justice, whatever it is that he's doing. What is more classic than the fight that Bob Anderson choreographed in The Empire Strikes Back between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker? There are several hints all throughout the footage that lead to more than just a couple of movie moves and cool looking stuff. Darth Vader fights with one hand only on his weapon for a lot of the actions in the beginning of the fight, only later to switch to two hands and much heavier, much more dramatic, and much more raging strikes. This is not by accident, not a bit of it. And the character of Luke also pulls off some kind of unorthodox moves, things that an expert would not probably attempt, because that's the point, is Luke's character at that moment in time is not an expert. If anything, he's surviving by the skin of his force teeth or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So all these things, Pyle, I know I'm going on my little tirade here, but I hope that gives you and your audience some insight on at least the way that I look of storytelling elements. And of course, fight work is a huge one. And I will finalize this by saying people should go back to Shakespeare for it. If they think fighting, it's so violent, I hate it, and I see it in every movie, and what a shame, and it's stupid to have fighting, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's the highest form of conflict. It's usually the last resort if the characters are intelligent characters. They don't start by wanting these things. But often, because dramatic structure and characters' desires being the antithesis of other characters' desires, push them in that direction. And finally, they usually come to a head. And as the famous phrase goes, literally from Shakespeare, it just says, they fight. And you're like, okay, I guess the choreographer can take it from there. And
And
ironically,
then, yeah, and then use his or her imagination to create the fight.
and
Yeah.
back in those days, I will add this, Pile, is that when Shakespeare was writing his plays, understand that a play is that demonstrably different from writing a book
Yeah.
and also writing a screenplay, but more similar to the screenplay, which of course didn't exist back in Shakespearean times,
Yeah.
no kidding. But a play is much more identical or similar to a screenplay
Yeah.
than the book is to the others. And the reason for this would be that even back then, it's very unlikely that Shakespeare himself walked onto the theater stage and said, "Okay, and now Tybalt, you will thrust here, and you will make your parry in fourth and or quart if you want to, or then second, and I want you to feint head and then disengage." It's unlikely. Instead, they probably would have had, as I've just explained, a fencing master come aboard the project and say, "Okay, gentlemen, you will do this, and you will here and there, and blah, blah, blah." Choreographed it. What do you expect?
Yeah.
People just flailing around and hoping for the best. That's not going to work. We
Yeah.
must rehearse everything, and even in the theatrical, it was even more important back in the day when you had no cameras and no resources for you to go back and look at your footage or whatever and say, "You probably should do this more because you looked a little silly when here, and I couldn't see that one action the way you were doing." You can't do that back then. You
Yeah.
just have to rely on people looking and telling you, "I couldn't see you in that one action, so you guys need to adjust your position on stage during that one moment." You know what I'm talking about? And they'll be like, "Oh, I was blocking you from seeing him getting punched there." And they'd be like, "That's correct." The audience would not be able to see that. Hopefully that gives you a little, maybe that's trying to catch a Niagara Falls or a giant waterfall with a cup,
Yeah.
but there
Yeah,
you
no,
go.
it gives an understanding. So what inspired you to actually create the Diamond Dragon series? I can see the backdrop.
So yeah, in the background, thanks for mentioning it. That is the book cover that I designed for Diamond Dragons 2. And I essentially design all of my covers with the exception of the first one, which was a effort between myself and the design team that I brought aboard with the intentions of them handling it and us going back and forth about certain elements and me trying to get them to do the work and whatnot. But in any case, so I would say that after doing all of this work that we've alluded to here, the 30 plus years of work in acting and in fight work and sound design and video editing, and also experiencing not only life, but theater and film and storytelling and books. I've enjoyed thoroughly reading all these wonderful stories, seeing them unfold on screen, in some cases both, right? Like we were all lucky enough, and I know everybody mentions it, but why, how can you not? We were all fortunate enough, greatly fortunate enough to not only see Tolkien's work in an animation style format from the, I want to call it the Rankin Bass example. I could be wrong if that was the wrong animators. People can forgive me. I don't know. We'll have to put up images of it or something. But the animation that occurred in the, I want to say it was the 70s when they made that, was pretty substantial for that time. It was not super high quality and they'd made lots of errors with his work. But all that aside, then many decades later came Peter Jackson and New Line Cinema being able to craft this wonderful trilogy that of course couldn't encapsulate the entirety of this series. It was just, there was just too much information. But with 3 films, they did a monstrously powerful, exceptional job at capturing not only the spirit of the work, but then just what people often don't really put together is you're like, the world building. Just look at the beauty of this image and this, and look at how dark and evil these one areas were, and that creature and those things, and the mighty shot of Gandalf appearing on the horizon with the sun rising, and you know him, Ian McKellen's beautiful and competent wizard-like voice. You shall not pass! All that kind of dramatic stuff that you can't get when you're reading a book. You can use your imagination to a point, but it can only generally get you so far. But finally, when you have brilliant professional actors, and I don't just mean Ian McKellen, people like Elijah Wood, what was it also? Hugo Weaving. What a wonderful, I forget the character's name off the top of my head, I should know this too, but he was the Elven King. Arwen, which was played by wonderful Liv Tyler. There's just all these wonderful, Galadriel, portrayed by Kate Blanchett, who was just in a film recently, several actually. But anyway, it's an enormously inspiring kind of thing to see every aspect of storytelling played out. And what I mean, again, to just make that clear to audiences, makeup, sound, and I don't just mean sound, the sound of a hawk or a rushing waterfall. I also mean stuff like a voice. What is it like when you have a character who's got this kind of gravelly, rumbly voice? And what is it when you have a character who's a lot more, hey guys, come on, this is the way, come follow me. The rhythms, the differences in all of that. And then, of course, the music. In Lord of the Rings, we had wonderful Howard Shore, which I believe he's passed away, unfortunately. I think that's correct. People can forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think that's right. But Howard Shore's music was beautiful. What a beautiful score. It's been analyzed in so many ways too, to show the sheer levels of brilliance that it's operating on, independent of just being like, that's a pretty cool sounding piece of music. It's, if you notice later, if you have played the pieces on their own, or at least watched it over and over, you start to catch, you're like, wait, that's so interesting. He's playing that one theme, but in a different key and flat. Right? Wow. And I'm probably not explaining it perfectly, but if anybody out there knows anything about music, they'll understand what I'm talking about. So to summarize that, Pyle, is that storytelling to me is not simply words on a page. That's great. It's certainly a great way to communicate information. I would argue that storytelling is so much more than that. And it's true that you do your best with the words to get it to lift off the pages and into people's minds and get those colors out there for them to see, get those sounds for them to hear.
Yeah.
And some people say, what the hell are you talking about? You can't even hear any sounds out of a book. I'm like, you can if you listen well enough to the words. And people will be like, what? What did you just say? I'm like, I know it sounds silly, but when you really think about it, it's where is it that Peter Jackson got all of this information? Sure, people had crafted different things, but so did Tolkien. Just
Yeah.
his elvish writing was enough world building on its own, this new language to spark the imagination of many. Pyle, I would just say that there's so many influences that have inspired me to do my series. It's just, we would be here for way too many hours for me to explain. Even video games. And I don't just mean simple, goofy ones or whatnot. I usually am talking about ones where you could detect that real storytelling was involved. Some of the most beautiful scores I've ever heard, Pyle, came from video games. And they came in the weirdest places where you're like, I had no idea. I'm like, all right, come here, listen to this music. And they'll be like, what game is that from? Well, is it from the 1980s when it was just 8-bit boops and garbage? I mean, they did their best. But this, some wonderful composer lifted it from that 8-bit score, reimagined it, and placed real instruments behind it. And they're like, I can't believe it's the same thing. I'm like, I can, because even when I was young and heard that stuff, I was like, this is brilliant. This is beautiful. If you played 8-bit music, a lot of people will be like, oh, it sounds terrible. It sounds beep, beep, it doesn't sound good. But you have to hear that orchestration. You hear the dramatic structure in the music.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers it. I know that's a lot to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. So clearly dragons are a central part of your series, right? So how do you actually approach designing these characters, both visually and in terms of personality and intelligence? What's your process?
Great questions. And that's multifaceted, but I would at least say this is, so with storytelling, the goal is always to make it on a human level. And that will sound a little ironic coming from the dude who's saying, hey, diamond dragons. And also people who have read any of my work, they'll realize that they'll be like, wait, is it just a story of humans and then they meet a few? I'm like, almost all the characters are dragons. This takes place on a planet where arguably they are the dominant species, and arguably almost no other majorly intelligent species exists on it. Or arguably, you'll have to read the books to find out more if there's something else under the hood, if you will. However, I still argue that I can't just say, okay, I'm going to make a whole bunch of esoteric dragons. They have their own language, they do their own things, and they're all like complete mysteries, and you're just not going to understand anything of it, and you suck. That's a good way to make it where if people are reading and they read more and they have absolutely no way to relate or understand any, relate to or understand any of the decisions that any of the characters are making, it's probably going to turn them off, arguably. Granted, I also am not the person who believes that every character, especially main characters, need to be the same as the reader. That is just ludicrous. You would never have wanted to experience Breaking Bad with wonderful Bryan Cranston, of course, Vince Gilligan and his team directing and making this wonderful project, but with Bryan Cranston masterminding the character of Walter White. Walter White was essentially a reverse Darth Vader. I guess Darth Vader started out good, but anyway, the point is the character of Walter White is a psychopath, a terrible one, right? But he's an interesting psychopath, and that is why the series was so popular. I can guarantee it. If someone were to try to say, oh, the reason I liked that character so much is he's just so relatable and I believe everything and I can't wait to be a drug dealer and a murderer, I'd be like, what? What are you talking about? No one would say that, I hope.
Yeah.
But the point being is that we want to see characters that are interesting, making interesting decisions, and also ones that feel like they're still logical. Sure, if they come from emotion, we can believe it, even if it's rash, irrational, and born of madness or anger or whatever. But if it's believable, then you're like, oh man, wow, that I don't know how I would feel if I was in that position. I almost feel I might do the same thing. You want that. So getting back to my own characters, I tried to not only start with the archetypes that are important from all storytelling purposes. Like when we go to things like Joe Campbell, I don't know if anybody knows who Joseph Campbell is. I'm sure you do, Pyle, but it's possible that listeners and viewers will not. Joe Campbell wrote The Hero of a Thousand Faces, The Hero's Journey, aptly named, and he was a professor at several universities. It's a long story, but anyway, he literally wrote the book on what storytelling is at the most core, especially given we're talking about something epic and not just like a romantic comedy or whatnot. Talking about a hero's journey where someone literally is going to go through this crazy adventure and either come out on top or on the bottom or have learned whatever. In things like Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings, you always have the young blank slate hero. It's just, there you go. If people start doing the math on it, they'll be like, wait, this guy's talking a lot of sense. And I'm not the first person who brought that up, but Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins, and Neo from The Matrix all have a lot of things in common. They start off with no direction. You don't really know a whole lot about them, and they're not that interesting by design. Some people might argue, I've seen this before, oh, Frodo was the least interesting character of all of the Lord of the Rings, and I like Aragorn, and I like this one. I'm like, that's good. That's a good thing. However, I'd argue that Frodo's character arc was the most powerful, the strongest, the most visceral, and also the most psychological and emotional. That's usually how the hero's journey goes, is the journey, although it is physical, although it is a fight of powers and magic often, even if it's fantasy magic like the Force, really just fantasy in disguise is really what the Force is. It's just magic. Even George Lucas has mentioned that. So again, it's not like I'm making this up as I go, but their journey is a lot more psychological. And the reason that hits so well with people is because it's universally available to everybody on the planet. Everybody has some psychological struggle. They always see themselves as this underdog who maybe, possibly, ostensibly, has the possibility to rise to the challenge and defeat their demons, whatever they might be. And all too often in these wonderful heroes' journeys, the true evil, the true demon, isn't Darth Vader. It's not Mountain Doom in the volcano. It's not Mr. Smith, Mr. N. It's not him. It's not, what's the other one I'm forgetting? Darth Vader, did I already say that? I don't remember what the other one is right now. But, oh, Harry Potter. It's not Voldemort, right? The wonderful Ralph Fiennes. What a brilliant actor. But anyway, it's in here. That's where the major struggles go. And always the storytellers will point to these things if they're competent and exemplary storytellers. And lo and behold, Tolkien absolutely conveyed that through his trilogy. 100%. It's not questionable. It's not even, oh, is that your opinion? I'm like, just look at the books. You can draw so many resources from it. It's just factual things. There's a psychological journey that's going on because of the ring where it's on his neck, not his finger necessarily the whole time, whatever, on a necklace, but where it's psychologically destroying him. And he has to cope with it. In The Matrix, the whole thing's happening in his mind. That's what The Matrix is supposed to be about. Literally with Morpheus saying, the world that has been woven around you does not exist, Neo. You must wake up. All this stuff. Someone might argue, oh, but Luke's journey was far more physical. I'm like, nope, wrong again. What do you think that weird cave scene in The Empire Strikes Back was all about? When there's something not right here. There's that cave. And he said, in you must go. Your weapons, you will not need them. And Luke looks at him and goes, I don't think so. I'm bringing my weapons in anyway. Very subtle. A lot of people don't talk about this moment, but it was actually a crucial film and storytelling moment that Luke brought his weapons in even when Yoda told him he did not. So actually, very interestingly enough, sometimes it's important to think about what is there and what is not. It would be interesting to see what George Lucas's opinion would be is if Luke listened to Yoda and did not bring his weapons in, because then he faces Vader in this cave in sort of a dream-like, esoteric, slow motion, wacky, bizarre, psychological sequence. And then when he defeats him immediately, which is very odd right there, that must have been a weird clue for him, and then Vader falls, the mask falls off because he cuts his head off, he decapitates him in the dream, the face mask blows off, and there he sees none other but his face. What the hell's going on? Imagine that scene if he didn't bring his weapons in. How would that have played out? Would they have had a conversation? I don't know. Now, it may seem like a tangent to your audience or maybe even yourself, but this is the point, Pyle, is that psychological underpinnings are way more powerful than a guy who's weak in the beginning, gets tougher, beats up the bad guys, and wins and gets the girl at the end. It's not a bad story. That's not a bad story at all. People love that, right? That's a Die Hard. Great. We love it. Bruce Willis, we love you. You're awesome.
Yeah.
It's a shame about his health right now. But
Yeah.
the point being too is, right? We love those kind of more basic level heroes' journeys. All you got to do is save the princess. You got to beat the bad guys, don't get shot, and win and get the special microchip back that if the bad guys have it, they will destroy the world. You got to get it back. Mission Impossible. Mostly physical, mostly challenges. So when it's on a psychological level, those are the kinds of things that I'm doing with Diamond Dragons. Now, sure, there are physical battles going throughout the whole thing. As you can imagine, dragons are strafing and flying and they're shooting fire, ice, electricity, poison. I mean, the main villain of Diamond Dragons, the first book at the very least, his name is Nitrozite. And just that word alone, you're like,
Yeah.
what the hell is that? He's a ghost dragon. And you're like, I should have known. He does sound like a skeleton. Nitrozite. You're like, what is that? And there's reasons, by the way, for all the character names. Something that's I find very important to storytelling. It's no mistake that Luke was named Luke, not just because of George Lucas, but because Luke was a very biblical and very common name. Harry Potter. Granted, we would maybe say in America, they'd say Potter. That doesn't sound like a very common last name. I get the first name, but I'm like, in UK, probably England, Potter, very common, very common. So they have to be attuned to understand it. I'll mention another quick one just to, not to rattle stuff off, but if anybody's familiar with John Carpenter of Halloween series and They Live, in They Live, the main hero was played by Rowdy Roddy Piper, Rip, what an amazing dude. But Roddy played John Nada, Nada. And his last name literally means nothing.
Nada. Yeah. Correct.
Nada.
Yeah.
This was not by accident. These are all purposeful storytelling devices. Whether you recognize them or you don't, or you recognize them later once you've seen it twice, or never, and it only operates on a subconscious level, it's fine. The storytellers are the ones doing these kinds of things. To get back to what you're saying here is, so the characters that I've designed are very much archetypes in the beginning, but they have quickly developed into the souls that they need to be so that you find your way into, not necessarily, I want to say, attach to one of them. I don't know, you might not like any of the characters to a certain extent, but you will certainly understand some of their decisions or the direction characters are going. I'll give one example too, to make it more specific. Oh my God. She's not even a main character. Violetta. What a funny girl. So Violetta is loosely, but also somewhat directly based off of Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind. If the viewers or readers, or readers, if the viewers or listeners don't necessarily know, Gone with the Wind is probably one of the most, not only one of the most amazingly crafted books of yesteryear, we'll say, but also the film was brilliantly crafted. On every level, it was pretty much exemplary for its time. Arguably, maybe someone could argue, oh, today it's very dated. I'm like, whatever. But the point is, beautiful. Anyway, so Margaret Mitchell, people can look it up. Get yourself educated, people. But anyway, Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind was, and pardon me if this irritates some people, and they'll be like, wow, she was pretentious, presumptuous, a prissy little brat who you just wanted to slap in the face because she was so arrogant and narcissistic in an awful way. What a great idea to place for a character where they are trying to get you to find connection and like this character. What a difficult journey that would be too, right? Because you go, I hate her. I hate everything about her. I want to punch her in the face. That's a good thing in some ways as a storyteller, because then if that character arcs over time and learns something, and they learn to be more humble, more empathetic, right? It's a powerful storytelling device. So one of my characters is very much a princess. She starts off very unlikable, very up in your face and very uppity and look at me and I'm so awesome. And I want my readers to, I don't want to say hate her, but that's arguably the direction. But eventually, as you can imagine, this character learns. Things occur where it's either step up or step out. And in the beginning of Diamond Dragons 1, she does exactly that. She steps out on her friends, on her family. And it's purposely made clear. And again, I don't want to give too much away. I don't think
Yeah.
I'm giving too much away. It doesn't really matter. I don't know who's going to even read it. But the point is, over time, they will see this character go through many journeys. And she's in one, but she's also in two. And I won't continue on from there because then people can go, does she survive to three and four? Who knows? I don't know. I don't want to give anything away. But I will also add that is a lot of the characters perish. They don't make it. And that is part of life. But it's also a great way for me to use these more fantasy style characters as dragons so that you can distance yourself from the characters. And when they die, it hits you hard.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can at least survive their death
Yeah.
differently than you would if you were seeing a character literally going, I tried to take the ring from him, Aragorn. I tried to take it. I saved them.
Yeah.
I fought for the hobbits. And then
Yeah.
for Sean Bean's wonderful acting and the, what is it, Boromir's character, he
Yeah.
just croaks right there. And you're like, oh man, damn, that's hard. It's a little easier when the dragons fall. But I will warn people, once you get connected to them, watch out. They
So
do
now
perish.
you've got book 4. Is
Correct.
it out? It's launching when? In December or towards the end of the year, right?
So book 4, let's talk about the launches really quick. So just to set the tone, I launch all of my books on the summer and winter solstices. So what does that mean? Basically, in June of 2021 was the first time I digitally released book 1. Then on 12 December, I released the print versions of book 1, 2021. And then so on. 2022 was book 2, summer,
Yeah.
winter solstice. 2023, which I have the book right here. I guess we'll see if it can see it without reflecting and being too wonky. It's being eaten. There it is. So that's book 3's cover. It's glossy, so it's going
Yeah.
to reflect,
Yeah.
which is very ironic. But so book 3 was in 2023, and again, digital during the summer and the winter. Now here we are, as of the time of this recording, the summer solstice of 2024 has passed, and therefore I've released some of that book on my website that people can see. And then when December rolls around, I'll release the print versions. And a quick caveat is for book 4, this is the first time that for the digital version, I only released half of the story. And there's many reasons for that, but I feel like possibly from now on, I might not release the digital versions at all. We'll see. But for books 5 and 6, they'll be appearing in 2025 and 2026. And I'm happy to say I just wrote about 1,700 words today for Diamond Dragons 5. And now it's at, I want to say, 14,000, something like that, because I have been working on arguably all of them over the years. It's not like I just do one and then next one. It's none of it like that. A lot of times I'm placing setups in books 1 and 2 and 3, and only for them to pay off in books 4 and so on, as you can imagine. It's quite a process, the storytelling process. And again, I wouldn't expect everybody to understand that unless they had the experience of doing these kinds of things over their decades. But if it gives them a window into just the complicated nature of all of it, like even the illustrations, that's a completely different animal, very interesting and also simultaneously arduous and rewarding.
Yeah, no, I can hear the passion in your voice, and obviously it's something that drives you, and the fact that you have multiple experiences within fencing, and you've done so much in combat, in sound design and all of that. I think and you've been an actor as well. I think all of it put together is what drives you. And I'm really excited for the print version of book 4. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, how can they do that? If you could just mention your website or socials.
Right. No, I would say pile that. And I appreciate that, by the way, too. Yeah, I hope the passion comes through in my voice. It should, given the fact of my background as an actor and doing VO and whatnot. For example, it would be really lame if I was always talking like this and I was like, oh yeah, pal, yeah, I wrote a book and it's nice and I hope
Yeah.
people buy it. It's not engaging. So that's another huge part of storytelling is you want to engage
Yeah.
people. And sometimes that means make them angry, make them frustrated, make them sad, make them triumphant, and make them feel like $1,000, make them feel like it's hopeless. Society is hopeless. Everybody's going to die. This sucks. You want to give them all those emotions. And if you're not doing that, then pardon my French, what the hell are you doing? Why do you do these things? Right? There's no reason to do something in your life, which is it's short. This is a very short amount of hours that we all have on this planet. And that, by the way, is the tagline to book one, which is, and I'll just say it and people can look it up or we can pop up the screenshot of the front cover, which is time is the only resource for which no creature may bargain, right? You can't buy it, you can't trade it, you can't generate more of it. It's one of those things that you don't even know when the end of it is, right? It's all too easy. Someone says, I got plenty of time. I'm only 30 years old. You have no idea. You might get hit by a bus. And they're like, oh, that's so negative. I'm like, I'm not trying to say you're going to get hit by a bus. What I'm trying to say is the idea of tomorrow is a very dangerous word. Dangerous word. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll quit smoking tomorrow. I'll get to that tomorrow. I don't know. Can't that wait until tomorrow? I don't know. I don't know. So whenever I've approached these projects that I've done over my life, Pyle, I've always thought about it and said, I want to do this. Is this something I want to do? Is this going to have a payoff not only for myself in terms of, hey, look, I accomplished this. That's a little bit narcissistic of, hey, look at me, I'm so cool. That's not why I do in my projects. That's not why I do it. That is a bad idea. I would say never ever do that. Sure, if you like a little bit of the fact that, hey, I get some appreciation, that's great, fantastic. But if you're doing it solely for the reaction of other people or money or whatever, fame, personally, I would highly recommend against that. Don't do that. However, if
Yeah.
you are like, and this is what happened to me back in, I want to say it was like 2004 and 5. I was like just doing some stuff and I'm like, what I've never seen is a live lightsaber performance, legitimate, on stage, people doing crazy moves, very bright lightsabers, sound, and like I don't think, does that exist? And I looked it up and I was like, I don't think I don't know. If it does exist, it's pretty difficult to find. That's what drove me to, I'm like, I want to try it. I want to see if I can pull this off. I have the skill set. If
Yeah.
anybody's going to have the skill set of people thinking about it, I do. I can bring it. And that's how one of my first, not first, but my first major projects that ended up on YouTube, because arguably that's when YouTube began.
Yeah.
Basically, I want to say it was late 2005, early 2006. I launched Balance of Power. One of my cast members convinced me to upload it. I'd never heard of YouTube. I uploaded it. Barely a few days went by, and it's you have 35,000 views or whatever. I'm like, what the hell? Back then, that was just it was enormous. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And I wasn't looking for that. I was just looking to make a really amazing project.
Yeah.
But also that sort of catapulted into doing more things, and people not only like say, hey, I want to know more about what you do, I'd like to join, but sometimes people asking about, hey, how do I learn how to do some of this? And that kind of catapulted from there. So for me, Pal, it's always been about working with people, different artists, building exemplary storytelling and design work and all that. I don't want to release it if I don't feel like it's my best work that I could do. Now, I don't have a Hollywood budget. I'm not a millionaire. So please don't email me if you're like, please support my project. Send me $1 million. I'll be like, I've never owned $1 million in my life, so I can't help you. But as people can clearly see from my fat face was in the way, but like I would say that behind you is a pretty good book cover. It looks diabolical with that tower and the lightning and that
Yeah.
crazy blood red sun or star. What's going on? And when
Yeah.
people read, when they read I often call it the engaging synopsis.
Yeah.
It's the writing's on the wall. People can use the website. They can use the videos, which are dramatic. There's no question of it. They're dramatic. They make you go, what is going on? What is all this craziness? The poetry that's involved in Diamond Dragons. Like, what is this? What is Armageddon's ballad? What is Armageddon's ballad? What's going on? These are
Yeah.
ways to influence other souls on the planet. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, Pyle, that's all we can do until we're out of here. And you never know how long you're going to have. Time's the only resource, like I said. And so I just say, whatever you want to do, whatever you think you were meant to do, whatever you are excited about, I suggest you get going. It's better to
Now
start
or
working on
never.
it
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
rather than play that tomorrow game. The storyteller is really in all of us if we choose to learn those skill sets, or at least be aware, become aware of all those things that we've all been learning almost subconsciously in some cases, or in some cases people will do it with purpose. Is when you watch a film, why do you get invested? Why do the characters move you? Why is it music is such magic? One of the lines one of my characters says, music is magic. Why is music so powerful to our ears? It's because it's oozing emotions and storytelling and structure to it. And it's so important that we're doing this kind of thing with one another. Otherwise, what are we doing out there? We're just droning through our lives like zombies. We want to be inspired. And sometimes, yes, it's through fantasy, but it can also be of other important things in life. If people will argue that storytelling is not important, it might inspire people to say, I want to build a theater where we can all come and enjoy these things and get together and learn from one another. I want to hire artists, which is what I've done a lot of times. I will bring people aboard and say, I need you to draw something, and I'm going to explain as much as I can, and then I trust your judgment. It brings people together, right? That's what a lot of these storytelling franchises often do. Star Wars, Harry Potter, Alien is another one, Blade Runner. There's a dozen of them out there, will bring people together. And to me, that's a very worthy thing. And I'm glad if anybody visits the Diamond Dash Dragons website to learn a little bit about what I've put into it, but also to see that it goes far deeper than just myself. This is a conglomeration of all sorts of storytelling, not only basics, but nuances that I've plugged into the books over time. And there's lots of secrets hidden in the books that people can go and find. There's tons of secrets in almost all, I don't want to say all, of the illustrations. There's 350 plus illustrations throughout books 1 through 4, print versions only, but
Yeah.
that's a lot of imagery, tons of just gorgeous things. And there's all these secrets hidden in there. So I challenge people to, if you can find one, if you can find 20, if you can find 60, email me, tell me what you found. You never know where that rabbit hole will go.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I've so enjoyed listening to you, and it's all storytelling, right? And you've just shown how much of that is ingrained in you right through this conversation. So thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I've genuinely enjoyed listening to you, and I'm sure the viewers and the listeners will feel the same. The audience will feel the same. So thank you once again.
For more weekly conversations, do listen to Melting Pot on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on YouTube and on Instagram at Podcast Melting Pot. So until the next episode, this is Payal signing off.